The Federal Reserve Chairman has a power that is unique to him alone. He can create money out of thin air. Since the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913, $1, excuse me, one 1913 dollar is now, 2010 dollars is what a dollar was worth in 1913, sorry. I would like to work with representatives like Ron Paul of Texas. He's introduced audit the Federal Reserve bills in Congress every year. I would like to prevent inflation. We're seeing it right now, especially in our oil prices. A lot of people have noticed that the gas prices have went up the last few days, and that is a result of countries like China and India negotiating with OPEC to trade in something else than the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is very weak right now. And I would also like to see some kind of a return to a gold standard so that we're not tempted to use the power of the Federal Reserve to fund our bank bailouts and our perpetual wars and all these welfare entitlement programs, because if we don't have the Federal Reserve around, then they're going to have to tax us. If they taxed us for what all these programs actually cost, the revolution would have been started a long time ago. So yes, I believe and I would support a full independent audit of the Federal Reserve.
Thank you. Ms. Emerson.
I am a sponsor of, a co-sponsor of Congressman Paul's legislation to audit the Federal Reserve, and it would be done by an outside independent agency, because when the Federal Reserve was originally set up, it was solely to deal with monetary policy, and it is outside the purview of, and statutorily it is outside the purview of the Congress and the executive branch. And no, this is not something that Congress could have impact on, because there has to be a separation. Now, I will say this, that the Fed has gone above and beyond dealing with monetary policy, and I believe that that is very risky. And they're certainly now trying to rejigger, if you will, inflation, deflation, and they're going to, in essence, print a lot of money so that it can stimulate the economy. This goes beyond its original purview. I secondly will say that I'm also concerned that we have a new consumer financial protection agency, something that the Phelps County Bank is very concerned about, that's going to be housed at the Federal Reserve. This is not their original mission, and it concerns me a great deal that they will start getting involved in fiscal policy, which is not appropriate for the Federal Reserve. So I support Ron Paul's bill, and I tend to agree with Rick on this one.
Thank you. Mr. Bill.
Yeah, I would be for an audit of the Federal Reserve myself. Probably also I'd like to gain some education on how it works, or how they come to their conclusions. And whenever they charge interest to anybody for their issuance of money, I'd like to know where that money goes to and who gets it. And I think that's probably the reason behind Ron Paul's efforts to audit the Federal Reserve and find out what that happened, how that happens. The one thing we're going to have to be careful of with our excessive spending when we keep running these deficits up is that eventually the Chinese and the Indians and whoever else and the Saudis and whoever else has got real money, they're going to stop lending it to us and turn it into hard assets. And if that's the case, in order to keep the Social Security checks coming, we're going to have to just keep printing more and more money until it's absolutely worthless. And that's why one of my goals, which I talked to people about whenever I was going door to door, collecting signatures for a year, was we need to reduce the spending. And there's ample opportunity for us to reduce spending in several different situations. Mr. Van Dieven already mentioned the large bases that we have in Japan, Korea, and Germany, who are in fact our economic competitors. And I was stationed overseas. I've been to Saudi Arabia and I've been to England, and I know that our base at England helps support their local economy in a significant amount, support that could actually be spent in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. The first response to the next question will come from Mr. Van Dieven. Do you support funding any military intervention abroad which is not part of a congressionally declared war? Please give examples to support your position.
Well, I don't believe that the Authorization to Use Force Act was constitutionally correct. Basically, Congress gave the keys to the military and a blank check to the president and said, go fight terrorism. I am the peace and prosperity candidate. I don't think that any serious discussion could take place about improving the economy, which is the hot button topic of the day, without addressing our aggressive and interventionist foreign policy. The occupation of Afghanistan is now this country's longest running military conflict. It is almost 10 years old. It is longer than Vietnam. It surpassed Vietnam in March of this year. This has turned into an occupation and nation-building exercise. And I've kind of purposely not mentioned my opponents by choice, but I have to address Mr. Sowers in this regard, that he keeps talking about bringing the troops back home. I find that a little bit ironic because I read an article on Wired.com that didn't have any mention about bringing the troops back home and actually talked about expanding the war into Pakistan and invading Yemen and Somalia. This is what we need to get out of, okay? They hate us because we're over there. I contend that our foreign policy is making us poor and unsafe. And I also support an immediate withdrawal of our military from the Middle East and from over the 130 countries around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Emerson.
Well, as a military mom, this is always a tough question because when one of your children is in the military, you tend to have sometimes different opinions about it. You know, I do know that there have been 114 or so interventions by a president without congressional declarations of war, if you will, and I think probably 15 times the president has actually asked for a declaration. And Congress does debate on the House floor and within the House Armed Services and the Senate Armed Services Committee. Lots of decisions about what will happen prior to any kind of vote, general vote being held on the floor, logistics and movement of troops, funding, what things are going to be used for specifically, and generally wants a fair amount of oversight in that. That primarily is led right now in the Congress by Congressman Ike Skelton, who all of us know here. He represents Fort Leonard Wood down the road. But if the question also revolves around Afghanistan or Iraq, you know, I look at the Taliban and I look at the fact that the Taliban, who happen to have been in charge in Afghanistan when 9/11 happened, that they wouldn't do anything to help us find Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. And the fact of the matter is, y'all, that these people hate us. They want to kill us. And we have had, you know, I worry about South Asia and the fact that if we don't allow General Petraeus to finish his work, then we will be in trouble.
Thank you. Mr. Bill.
I think part of the reason the Founding Fathers wanted Congress to declare war was so that everybody was on the same team. And if I were in Congress, that is one of the things that I would want to require before we actually committed our troops, because the Constitution requires it. And in order to get that commitment, that's what we have to do. We'll have to do that. Let's take a look at why we are involved in the wars that we're involved in. I think a lot of it can be traced back to energy independence. And it seems that the enemies that we have are fully capable of selling us petroleum. And these petroleum dollars are used to fund a war against us. And I don't think it's too much to say that it's because they hate us, or they don't like our lifestyle. I think it's more appropriate that we're interfering with their internal affairs, and we have been for the last, since the end of World War II. So if we can stop that motivation that our enemies have, as well as stopping the funding that they have to work against us, I think that's critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sowers.
Well, I do want to just clarify the record. Rick, you're going to have to re-listen to that interview because I did not advocate for invading other countries. But it is very clear that Congress has been derelict in their constitutional duty. Very clear. The last war that was declared, World War II, back in 1941. Since then, believe me, we've been busy. And the reason why Congress is given this power is because they're supposed to define the objective. It's the first principle of war. And then the executive is supposed to go and accomplish the objective. And then Congress is supposed to establish when it's done. So commence, continue, and conclude is the powers given to Congress. Why haven't they done that in Afghanistan? Our current objective in Afghanistan is to train, arm, and equip the Afghan military. We're training 400,000 to 600,000 Afghan tribesmen at great expense. Forget that this is the second most corrupt country in the world. Forget that it's a 7th century tribal mentality, a second-grade education with no history of a centralized government, and what's there is perceived as corrupt. Let's set all those aside and just say we're going to do it. The question that Congress must ask now, they should have asked it a long time ago, and I will ask, is who will pay for the Afghan military once we leave? We won't pay forever. Afghanistan, it would cost, at the most conservative estimate, 25% of their opiate GDP. And so training, arming, and equipping an Afghan military that will one day not be paid is in our nation's long-term strategic interest? I don't think so. So why aren't these questions being asked? We have our lowest number of veterans in Congress since World War II. It's not for lack of D.C. experience. We have our oldest and longest-serving Congress in the history of the Republic. It's why I believe in term limits. It's why I believe we need veterans, and it's why I believe we need new blood in Congress now.
Thank you. The first response to the next question will come from Ms. Emerson.
Excuse me, moderator, there's somebody out here who is flashing something, probably in the 1, 2, 3,
Where?
4th row, and a light keeps coming on right in the middle of when I'm talking. And so I
Okay.
don't know if anybody else has seen it, but then I can't see her time card. So
Okay.
I would appreciate
Whomever, would you please desist?
sitting
Thank
right
you.
there.
Sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It's just
That's right.
I can't see the time card when that happens. Okay, go ahead.
Do you support the repeal of the Bush tax cuts? Why or why not?
I do repeal, excuse me, I do repeal. I do support repeal, oh no, excuse me, I support actually extending the Bush tax cuts that began in 2001, and some were added in 2003 because our economy right now is absolutely too fragile to make any changes. As a matter of fact, we also need to look at the entire tax code for purposes of simplification, of making it flatter. The tax code prevents companies and employers from creating jobs right now. There are loopholes, special loopholes for one type of employer and not for the other type of employer. And so I think that it actually ends up penalizing any kind of job creation in this country. And then when you layer on the regulatory side of things, it does make for an inhospitable environment. So I would extend the current tax cuts because we desperately need job creation in this country. And hopefully we would be able to bring some certainty by getting rid of the health care bill, by getting rid of more regulations, and making certain that cap and trade doesn't exist so that our businesses can do more. I do want to say one thing back on the current mission in Afghanistan. The current mission is to keep al-Qaeda from having a safe haven in order to train and fight against us. I believe one of the tactics might be to train the Afghan military, but certainly that is not our mission, to train the Afghan military.